Last week we got through Romans chapter 5 and talked a lot about how was it that the death of one man, the resurrection of one man, can have such an effect on the rest of humanity, the rest of the human population. Grace may reign through righteousness to eternal life through Messiah Yeshua our Lord. I had hoped to be able to get all the way through chapter 6 this week. And guess what didn't happen? I didn't make it. I mean, it's, you thought that it's really one whole argument in the entire chapter. But it splits up right in the middle nicely. But I couldn't make it through. There's a little bit more here that needs to be talked about. Romans 6 is a great example of the difference between what was a first century conversation and argument and how we often use it in modern interpretations. It's almost comical, really, how the way most of us understand this chapter and its point is the opposite of the accusation and the conclusions that Paul is trying to make. So today it's really more of a teaching so we can get a better understanding of this chapter, because really getting this wrong, remember the whole point of Paul writing this letter to Romans is so that he can strengthen this body, this synagogue in Rome. He can strengthen them so that they will come together with this combination of Jew and Gentile. And getting this wrong weakens the body of Messiah. But the opposite is also true. So it means if we get this right, we are strengthened. So that's the whole point of this letter, to strengthen the synagogue in Rome and to strengthen ours as well. So when you look at Romans chapter 6, it's not through 1 through 23, so don't be too scared. On one hand, people are asking the question about no need for Torah, and on the other hand, in the modern world, they're celebrating the fact that there's no need for Torah. The first century is offended by the thought of giving up the Torah, while the modern century is thrilled by that idea, and they think that this chapter encourages it. And it all starts with verse 1. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin so that grace may abound? Where does this question come from? Why does Paul even feel the need to address it? Do we just continue? He's talking about the Gentiles and bringing them into this situation. It all stems from the accusations that have already been leveled against him and his teaching. So by not requiring the expected within the Jewish community, that full conversion process that they would expect the Gentiles to go through, by not requiring that whole year-long study of Torah, by not showing and demonstrating that they will conform their life to the halakha, the accepted way of the community, by not requiring circumcision in order to be gaining entrance and acceptance, but instead, from their perspective, just letting these Gentiles come in off the street, essentially. That's the accusation. Just off of their confession of faith in Yeshua, by immersing them, by baptizing them in the name of Yeshua, all as proof of God's grace. So if that is the standard, and righteousness or right standing before God is granted, and that's all you really need to worry about, why not just throw off the Torah requirements for everybody? Why do we need to be keeping this stuff? For Jewish people too, and not just at the beginning, but for the rest of our lives. Why not just drop it all? Because that way, grace may abound. Grace may be even more obvious. We've seen accusations along these lines. We've looked at them earlier, weeks before, in the book of Acts. That Paul, you're too lax with the Gentiles. You're bringing them into parts of the temple where they're not allowed. And rumor has it, you've been telling the Jews to quit with all this Torah stuff anyway. We see that in Acts chapter 21. It says, they've been told about you, Paul. This is when he's there in Jerusalem. And the Jewish leadership, the early believing leadership are telling him, Paul, this is what we're hearing. They've been told about you, that you teach all the Jewish people among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. So not just the Gentiles, don't you guys worry about it, but the Jewish people, you don't even have to worry about it either. Telling them not to circumcise their children or to walk according to the customs. Verse 24, says, in talking about this, this is the accusation. They're encouraging him then to go and participate in this ending of this vow and paying for other people to complete the process, join with them to prove this point. Then everybody will realize there's nothing to the things that they've been told about you, but that you yourself walk in an orderly manner, and they define an orderly manner by keeping the Torah. But even after he went through and did all of that, you see in verse 27, when those 7 days were about to be completed, the Jewish leaders from Asia, so the people who came and arrived after being in some of those places where Paul has visited on his missionary journeys, the Jewish leaders from Asia saw Paul in the crowd and began stirring up the whole crowd. They grabbed him, shouting, "Men of Israel, help! This is the man who is teaching all men everywhere against our people and the Torah and this place," so against Jerusalem, against the temple. "Besides, he has even brought Greeks into the temple and defiled this holy place, for they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian in the city with him, and they assumed that Paul had brought him into the temple." So Paul, you're just out there telling everybody, just don't worry about any of this stuff. And you've even brought all that stuff back here to Jerusalem, and you're just letting anybody walk into the temple that wants to. And that prospect offends the Jewish people of the first century. It offends even those who have embraced Yeshua as the Messiah. They're appalled at the thought of throwing away the Torah. And you contrast that with the modern believer's favorite verse from this chapter, which is down in verse 14, which is, "For sin shall not be your for sin shall not be master over you, for you are not under law, but under grace." How many of y'all have had to deal with this one before in your conversations and things? Just once or twice, or does it come up often? Often, right? Of course, this statement is used to say many times with its own form of accusation, or many times with its own form of glee, that the believer in Messiah really doesn't have to worry about the Torah anymore, has no relationship to the Torah, because we have been set free from it. We are not under any obligation to keep the Torah. And they talk about it like our lives are so much better because we are under grace and we don't need to worry about the law or the Torah anymore. Two vastly opposite conversations from what is the same argument that Paul is making. Different conclusions and different responses to the outcome of breaking from the Torah taken from that same chapter. And how is our modern conclusion so radically different from the first century concern? That's an important question. How are we coming to such a radically different position? Part of it, as you probably know, is centuries of reinforced bad theology. But what it boils down to mostly is, most of it's a matter of our own wants and our own desires. We don't want to be held to a standard. We don't want to be accountable to a standard. How many of y'all, especially as you were younger and growing up, loved being told no? Anybody? You can't do that. Usually when somebody says, I can't do that, I'm not allowed to do that, what happened in my heart, in my mind? I wanted to do it even more, right? You put that in front of me, and I'm going to find a way. I'm going to find a loophole. I'm going to find an exemption that lets me do it, even if you're going to let nobody else do it. Me, on the other hand, I can do it. We don't want to be held to a standard. We don't really want to stay on the narrow path. We want the narrow path. The narrow path is laid out there, and you kind of have to step where the narrow path is, right? When the narrow path goes over here, you go over there. We just kind of want to walk, and we want the narrow path to kind of magically appear under our feet. Y'all see how that works? Follow the yellow brick road kind of a thing. We want to walk anywhere, and the yellow bricks just are there. That's how we like to work. That's how we like to operate. We don't want to have the narrow path dictate things for us. We want the narrow path to go where we want it to. We want to be graded on a curve, right? I loved the curve grade growing up. We want the exception to the rule and the loophole. We want the standard to apply it to everybody but me. And I did that a lot as a kid. I was very good at that game. But on the one hand, the first century Jews were afraid that the standard was being thrown out and considered that a violation of faith in Messiah. They were appalled at the prospect of saying you don't need the Torah if you believe in Messiah, because the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Moses, won't have a Messiah who abolishes his law or his Torah. And then on the other hand, here we are, modern believers think that you can have the Messiah. You can't have the Messiah and keep the Torah. You can't have one and the other, that they are incompatible. And a lot of it is wants and desires, but in some respects, it's also that words and ideas don't mean what they used to. Definitions of things have changed over the years, right? Especially the word sin. This is one of those examples. It's been too long since I've been able to use, well, where is my picture? Oh, I did not check this. This is a problem. Anybody want to guess what was supposed to be here? I don't think it means what it means. This is supposed to be, I don't think it means what you think it means, kind of a moment. Inconceivable, exactly. That was supposed to be here. Tell, are any of my pictures in the service? Can you tell? Oh, goody. The next one's missing too. You'd like that, wouldn't you? So, even the definition for sin is different than what is present in the scriptures. And y'all agree, the best definition for words in the scriptures are taken from where? From other scriptures, right? So when you look at the word for sin, it says, anybody, do not continue, shall we go on continuing to sin? And when you look it up in Strong's and different things like that, the first concept talks about the idea of missing the mark. And that's fine, that's okay. It's that archery kind of concept. It's the bullseye kind of concept, and there's supposed to be a picture there. Man, that's really going to mess up my one later. Ty, you saw it. You know it's there. It was. Man. So it's an archery type of term. It's an architecture type of term where you're talking about the plumb line, which is basically just a weight being held to give you a 90-degree, a vertical angle. But the problem with even that definition is it's still somewhat abstract. It's not really telling you what the standard is. And that's part of the problem. Because we like it being abstract because we can kind of fill in the blank of what the standard is at that point ourselves. It's not until, and there's supposed to be a picture of this here, you get down to the fifth definition on Strong's for what they put as this definition. It means to wander from the law of God or to violate God's law. They don't get to that one until number 5. That which is done wrong, sin, an offense, a violation of the divine law in thought or in act. Now, is that a different concept than just missing the mark? Does it define what the standard is when it says to wander from the law of God? Do we know what the standard is? What's the standard? The law of God, right? The Torah, that's the standard. Right? It defines that. And so when you get to the scriptures, you see that play out. 1 John 3:4, everyone practicing sin also practices lawlessness. Indeed, sin is lawlessness. That word in Greek is anomia, meaning without or against even the law, against the law or against the Torah. King James translates it like that. Well, many of them will say lawlessness or Torahlessness or a violation of the Torah. King James translates it as the transgression of the law. The Complete Jewish Bible puts it like this, everyone who keeps sinning is violating Torah. Indeed, sin is violation of the Torah. That's a much better definition. That's what Scripture actually says. Sin is without the law, Torahlessness. And it's no longer abstract. It's very specific, especially within a first century Jewish context where the Torah is still upheld as the standard, the defining standard in the way of life for God's people. The Torah is the bullseye. The Torah is the plumb line. Perfect Torah keeping is a sinless life. Right? Does that make sense? Say life without sin is perfectly keeping the Torah. If sin is Torahlessness, then not sinning is Torah fullness. Right? Does that make sense? When we claim that Yeshua had no sin, that he was sinless, we are saying that he kept the Torah perfectly without any violation or transgression or breaking of the Torah. So to be a sinner is to be a breaker or transgressor of the Torah. To be sinful means you are continually breaking the Torah. Does that make sense? I mean, that's definitions. That simple definition of sin changes the nature of verse 1. It puts it in the proper context of the first century and the concern of all of those Jewish believers who think that Paul is lowering the standard of conduct, not just for the Gentile, but for all of them who have accepted Yeshua as Messiah. I mean, look at it like this. What shall we say then? Are we to continue in sin so that grace may abound? And his answer is very strong, isn't it? May it never be. How can we who died to sin still live in it? Look at it with the translation in there. What shall we say then? Are we to continue to violate the Torah? Right? That's the definition of sin. Are we going to continue to violate the Torah so that grace may abound? And his answer is what? No. How can we who died to the violation of Torah still live as violators of the Torah? Does that kind of affect the meaning a little bit? It's not abstract anymore, is it? How can we continue to live as violators of the Torah? Or the other way of looking at it, are we to continue to be without the Torah, to be Torahless, so that grace may abound? May it never be. How can we who died to a life without the Torah, which is what many of the Gentiles, many of the Greeks were, how can we still live a life without the Torah? We died to that life. That reframes the whole argument. Paul is not asking the Jews who believe in Yeshua to stop keeping the Torah. He's not lowering any of the standards for them, nor is he giving the Gentiles a pass to keep on living a life of their previous way of life, as a pagan Gentile, a life without the Torah at all. Because they believe in Yeshua, he's actually raising the bar for them, raising the standard for the Gentiles, because they didn't have a standard before. They didn't have the bullseye before. They were lawless. They were without the Torah, and they can no longer live that kind of life. So that accusation that's been leveled against him from the book of Acts and other places, he's like, that. There's no way I'm teaching anybody to do that. And then he starts to turn to the reasons why this is so. Verse 3 says, or do you not know that all of us, and here he's talking both Jew and Gentile, all of us who were immersed into Messiah Yeshua were immersed into his death. Therefore, we were buried together with him, that through immersion or baptism into death, in order that just as Messiah was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. Now, in my traditional background and such, this is one of the most popular verses to teach about baptism, right? Anybody grow up with that, understand it that way, use it that way? Many times. But Paul is not really making a statement about baptism here. Baptism is the vehicle to make the point. In the same way that when you read Acts chapter 10, and Peter is being taught a lesson from God about going and visiting Cornelius' house. Y'all remember that? And what's the mechanism? What's the vehicle that God uses to try to teach Peter the lesson? The sheet being lowered down with all sorts of unclean animals on it, and he gets in there and says, rise up, Peter, kill and eat. And he's like, no way, I'm not doing that. Right? Because Peter would typically have the same kind of reaction to killing and eating an unclean animal. He would react to, hey, Peter, you want to go to the Gentiles' house? He's like, no way, I'm not doing that either. Right? He would have the same level of reaction to both of those prospects. And so God is using that. And too many people make Acts chapter 10 about the food, about the sheet. That God gives me permission to eat whatever I want. And they instead ignore Peter's interpretation of that vision, that it's about the people, about the Gentiles. We make it about the object or the mechanism to teach the lesson, the vehicle to teach the lesson, rather than the lesson itself. Baptism or immersion is not the point. How our immersion into Messiah, we've been baptized into his name, who he is and what he did for us. The lesson is how that truth, that reality, changes our life and our relationship to sin. Changes our relationship to the breaking of God's law. Baptism or immersion changes that. How our faith in him will not allow us to continue living the old way, by the old rules, our old way of life, where we were breaking the Torah without even knowing it, without doing what we tend to do, is without looking for the loopholes or the exceptions or the excuses, right? Our faith in him will not allow us to continue to do that. We have a new way of life, so we too might walk in newness of life, a new way of life. Our life now is to be a reflection of his life now. Right? It's not your best life now, it's his best life. And what kind of life does Yeshua have now that he has been raised from the dead? What kind of life does he have? Is Yeshua free to break the Torah or free to sin now that he has been raised from the dead? Anybody say yes on that one? You know, because when you sin, that earns a wage, doesn't it? What is the earning of sinning, of breaking the law? Death, right? So if sinning earns the wage of death, could that ever work in his resurrected, glorified body? No, right? His body, now that he has been raised, that has nothing on him. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? Yeshua didn't deserve to die in the first place, right? Yeshua never sinned in his mortal life. You know, that's the point of the virgin birth. That's why he was the spotless lamb, why no one could accuse him, why he didn't die for his own sins, but on our behalf. He never broke the Torah before, so it's ridiculous to think that he would break the Torah after his resurrection. And your baptism, your immersion into his name symbolizes that you were buried with him to the penalty of breaking the Torah, death, so that you may be also raised from death to life, raised to walk in a new way of life. And it's the same kind of life that he lived and he continues to live to this day. That's the kind of life that you're supposed to live. And if he's not ever going to be allowed to break the Torah in his resurrected life, so his life is one that keeps the Torah, the law of our King, what kind of life are we supposed to live? Our life is supposed to look like his because we've been buried with him and we've been raised in his life. A life that keeps the Torah. One that in the future, will go forth from Zion to all the nations. This is language of the kingdom. In those last days, many peoples will go and say, "Come, in the Messianic era, in that Messianic kingdom, let us go up to the mountain of Adonai, to the house of the God of Jacob. Then he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For Torah will go forth from Zion, and the word of Adonai from Jerusalem." The Messiah, in his resurrected life, will be leading by example in regards to the Torah. The king on the throne will be doing all of that. He will be teaching his Torah. He will be enforcing his law. Right? Torah is going to go forth from Zion as his rule goes around the world. And that's that principle that we talk about all the time. If we know that this is where we're going, right? If we know that this is our future in his kingdom, then should we just wait until we get there to worry about any of that stuff? If we know that's where we're going, then maybe we should start bringing that to our life today, right? If we know that's our future in his kingdom, then aren't we not ambassadors for that kingdom, right? We're ambassadors for our king. We may live here in this world today, but we're representing our kingdom and our king. We're representing that future. And so we should begin conforming our lives to that future as much as possible today. Even in the kingdom, according to Isaiah 66, when there is a new heaven and a new earth, the Sabbath rest that is to come will be keeping Shabbat. He talks about the new moons. He talks about not eating, the swine flesh, or will be going to Jerusalem to worship. All those different kinds of things. In the kingdom, in the Messianic era, is there going to be more keeping of the Torah or less? What do y'all think? It's going to be more than what we see happening today. That's the easy way. It's certainly going to be more than we have today. So the question of throwing off the Torah so that we experience more grace is a non-starter. Grace is poured out upon us because we break the Torah, yes. But the goal of the transforming power of grace is so that we can be empowered then to keep it. So that we will no longer be a slave to the breaking of the law when we, because apart from him, apart from Messiah, apart from that work of grace, we have no real option but to break it. That's the only thing we can do. But because our lives are raised with his life, that's the next statement in Paul. Paul says in verse 5, if it's true that we have become joined together in the likeness of his death, certainly we also will be joined together in his resurrection. Knowing our old man was crucified with him, so that the sinful body might be done away with, so we will no longer serve sin. We will no longer be slaves to sin. Right? Looking at it with the definitions, sometimes we get lost because the word sin has become too abstract. Verse 6, knowing that our old man was crucified with him, so that the body that continually breaks the law, continually breaks the Torah, might be done away with. So we no longer serve the lawlessness. We no longer serve anomia. We no longer serve without the Torah. And if we are no longer serving without the Torah, if we're no longer a slave to breaking the Torah, then isn't the opposite true? That's not what we are anymore. Now we live and serve not without the Torah, but with the Torah. We serve keeping the Torah. We are a slave that doesn't break the Torah anymore. We are now a slave that is seeking to do what? Keeping it, following it. Our old man, the man that broke the Torah all the time, is dead, crucified, and buried. That one is not what comes back to life. What was raised to the new life is not the same. For he who has died is set free from sin. For he who has been paid the wage of his sin is set free from it. For he who has died is set free from the breaking of the Torah. He who has died is set free from a life without the Torah. Y'all following along? So the accusation that is being leveled against him, is he saying it's true or is he saying it's false? That he doesn't have a standard, the Gentiles, we just don't have to worry about this stuff anymore. No, he's not saying that at all. Right? If we have died with Messiah, we believe that we shall also live with him. We know that Messiah, having been raised from the dead, no longer dies. Death, the consequence of breaking the Torah, no longer is master over him. Death has been defeated. Death no longer has a sting. Resurrected, Yeshua being resurrected, is he ever going to die again? That would kind of mess things up, wouldn't it? So death, the result of breaking the Torah, no longer has any real legal authority over him. And that means that since we are raised with him, that means it no longer has any real legal authority over the believer, because your citizenship has changed. You're no longer under the authority of the original breaker of God's law. You're no longer under his authority anymore. Right? Your citizenship has changed. Paul puts it like this in Colossians. He has rescued us from the domain or the dominion or the authority of darkness. And he's brought us into the kingdom of the Son whom he loves. In him we have redemption, the release. That's no longer, it's release in the sense of the same thing as the Jubilee. You have been released from that slavery. The rest of the unbelieving world, Jew and Gentile, are still slaves to sin, to anomia, to the breaking of the Torah, they're still in the domain or dominion of darkness, right? And so what do you think happens when the man of lawlessness, the man of anomia appears? Those that are still under his dominion, do they like him or don't like him? The man of lawlessness, when he appears, all those that are still slaves to the breaking of the law, that's our guy. And that's why the genuine believers who have been set free from under his authority and been moved into the kingdom of the Son, genuine believers will never come under or be deceived by or follow the man of lawlessness, because we're not under his authority anymore. Instead, we're under the authority of the one who conquered that kind of lawlessness, that kind of Torahlessness. His followers don't throw off the Torah at all. Rather we embrace it as the life of our King, because that's the life that he lived, right? Verse 10, for the death that he died to the breaking of the Torah once and for all, but the life he lives to God. So also, or in the same way, just like Yeshua, continually, every day, every moment, no exemptions, no loopholes, no days off. Don't for 1 minute think that you have a built-in excuse to break the Torah, right? So also continually count yourselves both dead to sin, a life that is breaking the Torah. Count yourself dead to that, while at the same time counting yourself alive to God in Messiah Yeshua. Don't think for a minute that you have a built-in excuse to break the Torah, because that life is over. It's never coming back. You're not a zombie. That was supposed to be the picture here. Y'all are missing out on that. You are not a zombie. You're not alive in a dead body. Right? Isn't that what a zombie is? A dead body that's still kind of moving and kicking? That's not you. You're not in a body that is alive, but governed by decay, governed by the breaking of God's law, which that's what brought decay into this world in the first place, all the way back in the garden. That's why that decay exists, is the breaking of his law. And what's so amazing is, without really understanding the implications or realizing it, that a lot of the misinterpretation of today is they actually want to be a zombie, because they want the life of Messiah, but they want that life without the authority of the Torah. They still want to be under the old way, wanting to keep it abstract so they can have a built-in excuse to go on sinning. To these, the man of lawlessness is going to sound really good, because he's going to give them everything they want. I can always repent later because I'm under grace. Here's my get out of hell free card. If you remember that, there's supposed to be a picture of that, because you can have one of those too. They want to enjoy the benefits of the sinful life with that promise of eternal life. They want to claim essentially diplomatic immunity, right? While loving the way of life that the kingdom of darkness has more than their home in the kingdom of the Son. They don't want to live the way of life of the kingdom of the Son. They'd rather live like we lived before in the kingdom of darkness. But that kingdom, this world and its way of life, that's not your home, right? You're just a passing through. Isn't that one of the old hymns? This world is not my home. You died to that world. You have new life in Messiah. In all of this, Paul is answering the charge of those in his day about abandoning the custom of Moses, and he's not giving an inch to the modern hope of not being accountable to God's Torah. He's not giving an inch to that. Because he goes on to say, therefore, do not let sin, do not let the breaking of the Torah rule in your mortal body so that you obey its desires. Is he giving an inch to the modern interpretation? No. And he says, and do not keep yielding your body parts to sin. Do not keep yielding to the breaking of the Torah as tools of wickedness, but yield yourselves to God as those alive from the dead, and your body parts as tools of righteousness to God. So by continually breaking the Torah, thinking you have this built-in excuse to ignore God's standard of holiness and righteousness, reasoning that we can do whatever we want, whenever we want, because we're under grace, means that you are a tool and an instrument of wickedness. That's a harsh term, isn't it? And wickedness is using that interpretation as their tool to injure and harm and discredit your king, to make him look bad. You know, again, one of my favorite movies is Mel Gibson's movie, The Patriot. There's a moment in that place where an upper officer is reprimanding a lower officer for being too brutal in his conduct of war, and he says, you know, the manner in which you serve me does what? It reflects upon me. You know, the manner in which we serve Yeshua reflects upon who? Reflects upon him. And so to disregard the Torah of the king is to disregard the king. And you're actually claiming, by making that modern interpretation, that you're not really under his authority when you reject his law. He's not really your sovereign. He's not really your Lord. And Paul is saying, don't be a tool of wickedness and believe that. Instead, be a tool of righteousness that's at work in this world, because you do have a king, you do have a sovereign, you do have a Lord and master. Right? For sin, the breaking of the law, shall not be master over you, for you are not under law, but under grace. And this verse, the way we often use it, makes no sense to say, the breaking of the law shall not be master over you, for you are no longer concerned about keeping the law. Does that make sense? Breaking the law is not your master because you're not worried about keeping the law anymore, because you're under grace. That's in essence saying, now that I am under grace, I have permission to break the law of God. And he is not saying that at all. He's not granting the wish of modern believers. By no means, may it never be, he says. We don't go on sinning that grace may increase. He's saying the opposite. Grace increases because it's bringing you to his law. It empowers you to keep the Torah. By accepting Yeshua as the Messiah through faith like Abraham, you're going through the covenants. We've talked about that. You're coming through to believe where righteousness is credited to you. And then he brings you to even the Mosaic after you pass through the waters. Then you come to the mountain to be shown how to live. Breaking of the law, breaking of the Torah is no longer your master, because the penalty of breaking the Torah is no longer your destiny. You are dead to that life. Now grace is your master, and you have been raised with Messiah, and you are called to live the same kind of life as him, and you have agreed to submit and live to that way of life. You have agreed and committed to live by the Torah, because that is the law of your king, and it's the law that governs his kingdom, the kingdom that we should all be hoping for and waiting for and anticipating. So if you want to see the king on the throne, where that Davidic covenant is fulfilled, then you want to be a faithful tool of his authority. You want to be a faithful knight in his kingdom, because that future life of the kingdom, when Torah goes forth from Zion, that is yours to live today with all the people of God. That way of life, that rhythm of life, of Shabbat, of the feasts, of new moons, and all those things, all that call to holiness, that is now your master, because that's the life of your king. And so we are called to live by our new master and his ways. That makes sense?